Imagine waking up on a Tuesday morning, looking in the mirror, and realizing you have exactly 240 paychecks left before the world expects you to step aside. If you are 40 years old, that is your reality, 240. It is a finite, legible number. When you were 22, your financial horizon looked like infinity. Time was an invisible, abundant resource you could waste on bad cars, speculative investments, and the comforting lie that you would figure it out later. But 40 arrives without an invitation. And suddenly, later is right now. This is the opening bell of the 40-year-old financial war. It is a quiet conflict, fought not with weapons, but with spreadsheets, automated bank transfers, and the deep, ambient dread that you are starting the race half a lap behind everyone else. To understand why this war matters right now, you have to look at the unique trap built into modern midlife. Economists call it the peak earnings paradox. By the time you reach your 40s, you are likely making more money than you ever have in your life. On paper, you look successful, but in reality, your capital is spoken for before it even hits your account. The mortgage, the kids' tuition, the rising cost of healthcare, and the stealthy creep of lifestyle inflation mean that your cash flow is essentially a highly efficient transit system. Money arrives, stops for a fraction of a second, and immediately leaves for someone else's balance sheet. You are caught in the absolute center of the sandwich generation. You are funding the future of people who are younger than you while simultaneously managing the decline of people who are older than you. And in the middle of this squeeze, your own financial runway is shrinking by 12 notches every single year. Most conventional financial advice is written for 25-year-olds who have 40 years to let a low-cost index fund slowly grind its way toward $1 million. That advice relies on a luxury you no longer possess, a massive runway. When you start late, the math changes completely. The system operates on an entirely different set of rules, and if you apply the slow and steady playbook to a compressed timeline, you are choosing a strategy engineered for defeat. To win a war on a compressed timeline, you have to understand the mechanics of capital velocity. In your 20s, your greatest asset is time. In your 40s, your greatest asset must be the sheer volume of your inputs. Think of it like trying to fill a swimming pool. A 20-year-old can use a garden hose because they have all day. A 40-year-old needs a fire hydrant. This means the first phase of the strategy is not about finding a magic stock or a trendy asset class. It is a brutal, unvarnished structural audit of your personal economy. It requires what forensic accountants call capital liberation. Every single fixed expense must be treated as a vulnerability. If you are carrying consumer debt or a high-interest car loan at 40, you are paying an invisible tax that directly subsidizes someone else's retirement while permanently crippling your own. Next-level accumulation requires eliminating these systemic drains first. Once the leaks are plugged, the fire hydrant must be turned on. The standard recommendation of saving 10% of your income is entirely useless if you are starting at 40. You are looking at a target of 30, 40, or even 50% of your net income being rooted directly into wealth-producing assets. It sounds uncomfortable because it is. It requires an intentional, temporary decoupling of your consumption from your earnings. You have to actively choose to live like a person who makes far less than you do, purely to buy back the years you traded away. This is where we run into the uncomfortable math, the hidden mechanism that no one explains until you are too old for it to be convenient. When you invest $500 a month at age 25, compounding does 90% of the work. By the time that person is 65, their total principal contributed is a relatively small fraction of the final balance. The market did the heavy lifting while they slept. But when you start at 40, the math flips. Because your capital has fewer years to double inside the market, your personal contributions will make up the vast majority of your final net worth for the first decade. If you look at a compound interest chart for a late-start portfolio, the line looks flat, boring, and utterly discouraging for the first 5 years. This is the psychological danger zone. Human psychology runs on immediate feedback loops. We want to see evidence that our sacrifice is producing an outcome. In the first 3 years of an aggressive late-stage financial plan, the evidence is almost completely invisible. You are sacrificing vacations, driving an older car, and eating out less, yet your brokerage account looks like a rounding error. The mechanism at play here is called the compounding lag. It is the period where your portfolio has not yet achieved enough mass to generate its own velocity. At a standard 7% return, a $50,000 account only makes $3,500 a year. That is less than $300 a month. It feels pointless. It feels like trying to move a boulder by throwing pebbles at it. The person who survives this phase is not the one who is highly motivated. Motivation is a volatile chemical that evaporates during a market downturn. The person who survives is the one who understands that the initial phase of late-stage investing is not an investment strategy at all. It is an exercise in pure capital accumulation. You are building the engine block. You cannot expect it to generate horsepower until the cylinders are cast. If you value financial analysis that respects your intelligence instead of insulting it with get-rich-quick fairy tales, take a second to subscribe to this channel. We build deep, data-driven deep dives that pull back the curtain on structural economics without the fluff. Let's get back to the math. Because this accumulation phase is so uncomfortable, it creates a massive market for financial mirages. This is the contrast between the hype and the reality of the 40-year-old financial war. When people realize they are behind, panic sets in. And panic is the most profitable commodity in the financial services industry. Walk into any online forum or video platform, and you will see products specifically engineered to exploit the anxiety of a 45-year-old with $20,000 in savings. They promise shortcuts. They talk about high-yield options trading, leveraged real estate flips, or speculative digital assets that can turn $5,000 into $500,000 in 24 months. It is a beautiful narrative. It is also a statistical trap. The reality of these high-velocity strategies is that they carry an asymmetric risk profile. The probability of total capital destruction is exponentially higher than the probability of outsized returns. If a 24-year-old blows up their account trading options, it is a painful lesson. They have 40 years of human capital left to replace that money. If a 48-year-old blows up their account, it is a permanent downgrade to their standard of living for the rest of their natural life. The hype tells you that you need to be aggressive with your asset allocation, that because you have less time, you need to take more risk to catch up. The reality is exactly the opposite. Because you have less time, you have less capacity to recover from a systemic market crash. You cannot afford to play blackjack with your remaining paychecks. Your aggressiveness cannot come from the type of assets you buy. It must come exclusively from the amount of money you inject into stable, broad market index funds and productive infrastructure. If we zoom out from the individual spreadsheet, the implications of this financial war take on a much larger structural weight. We are living through an era of unprecedented corporate volatility. The workplace of today is not the stable, predictable hierarchy of our parents' generation. Corporate ageism is a real, measurable economic phenomenon. Mid-management positions, the exact roles occupied by people in their 40s and 50s, are the primary targets for corporate restructuring, automation, and algorithmic efficiency. If your entire financial survival depends on a high-paying corporate salary that can be optimized away by a software update or a consulting firm, you are operating from a position of profound vulnerability. When you are behind on your investments, you are forced to say yes to toxic work environments, compliance with systems you do not respect, and the quiet humiliation of knowing you cannot afford to walk away. Or are you willing to accept the temporary, sharp discomfort of a compressed war footing to build a foundation that can never be destroyed? The clock is ticking, The market is open. The choices are entirely yours.